Okay, so yeah, as just said, my name is Patrick Kennedy. I'm a project manager with the City of New York, DOT. And yeah, so New York City DOT, we are a really big organization. There's like 5,000 people working on the streets all the time. We have a lot of infrastructure to maintain, 6,000 miles of streets, 12,000 state-line intersections. There's also tons of people doing tons of things all over the place. We've got tourists, we've got employment increasing, the population's going up, there's tons of people biking, tons of people taking the train. So there's a lot of activity here in New York City. So what we do at City DOT is, in my unit, is we use what we call a street improvement toolbox to make these very common sense and also very easy to make design interventions on city streets. So that could be crosswalks, that could be, I've got a pointer here, that could be curb extensions, that can be bus lanes, protected bike lanes, all types of design treatments to make these streets more walkable and more bikeable. We also do things like islands, we do curb extensions, median extensions. We work with curb regulations because unlike a lot of other cities that may have alleys or other spaces, parking lots to load and unload, we don't have that. Everyone has to do all that out on the street, usually during rush hour. We also make sign and signal changes to basically process vehicles or process like pedestrian crossings or movements more efficiently and more safely. So from the bicycle perspective, this was our bike network back in 2007. We've been very busy in the past 10 years or so. Pretty much if this network here now represents hundreds of miles of bike lanes, both of the sort of the conventional variety, just paint on the street, and also much more substantial design treatments, some of which I will show you. But yeah, we've got now over 1,100 miles of bike lanes in the city, so we've been very busy over the past decade or so. All right, okay, cool, yeah. And so some of our strategies with doing that is, of course, to focus on sort of the core areas here. This is actually where we first launched our City Bike program. So it's pretty much in this little piece of the city. There's a lot more of New York that we have to get to. But you can see that transformation from 2007 on to 12 on to 2017 is very, very dense in this core network. And it's also the toughest part in which to do a lot of these treatments. It's where the most people are, it's the central business district. So there's a lot of competing priorities. And even something as small as something like this, which is our Queensboro Bridge connection, which is a contraflow lane on one block of First Avenue, was an incredible change for people who are riding their bike coming from Queens or going to Queens. Because it really just, it sort of activated the entire east, the Second Avenue lane, being able to get into Midtown. It made a very easy connection for them, but it was only one block long. So, we've got a lot of bike lanes out there. We have a lot of improvements that we've done. Might be difficult if you're starting from a place where you don't have any of that to envision how your city or how your municipality can get to that level. And the advice is to pretty much start simple. This is a standard bike lane project. All it really does is 3 nice little lines on the street, organizes the streets so that cyclists have their own dedicated space, cars have their own dedicated space. A little backstory on this. This was actually the Upper East Side. Woody Allen came out to the community board meeting to speak out against these. So even if something is designed simply, sometimes it's not as simple to get that into the ground. From there, you can work up to something else a little bit more, a little more substantial. In this case, we have a much wider street in Bushwick. In this case, we had to do a little bit more designing, but the principles remain the same. We're trying to channelize the vehicles, give them their own dedicated space, keep them away from the parked cars, but also keep them away from the cyclists. So with a little bit of design, even like a wider street that might seem more chaotic and disorganized up there, with very, very simple, just paint and striping, that can be addressed and organized, and you can provide safe spaces for cyclists to be. Also, other types of changes. We have a lot of truck traffic in New York, but I mean, truck traffic is something that everyone has, and oftentimes you may want to do an improvement on at an intersection or in a certain place where there might be truck traffic that because of like turning vehicles, you can't do that, or some other reason you can't do that. For us, we've actually just prioritized the spaces where trucks should be. So in this case, here's an example. We'll oftentimes ban a turn onto a side street, pretty much because we may have an improvement there or something else like that, but also we realize that trucks don't really need to be at that location when they're over a certain size. So just sort of designating places in your municipality where maybe you don't want 18-wheelers to be, by simply with signs, is something that allows you to now some freedom to reorganize a roadway or shorten a crossing and make a pedestrian experience better. Also, something else we've done, we've put in about 25,000 bike racks, but we put these in on the streets. We'll take a parking space, and we will just put these bike racks in, protect them with little planters, but these are in places where we don't even have bike lanes. We made us to know that cyclists are going to be there. So just concentrating a bike rack, even on a street without any biking infrastructure, is something that you can do to encourage people to get out, be more active, and get on their bike. So our conventional bike lanes, this is Vanderbilt Avenue in Brooklyn. It's a great example of the kinds of when we can sort of bring a couple of aspects of our toolkit together. In this case, we had what was 2 lanes in either direction. We just made it 1 lane in either direction with a center turn lane. So we were able to put in an island in the middle for pedestrian crossing so that people could have a place to stop, organize the turns that were coming off, going onto the side streets, and also provide a bike connection through here. Treatments like this typically reduce fatalities by about 40%. It makes the roadway much more predictable and much less, less deadly. We've got tons of these types of treatments all across New York. Something more substantial, the protected bike lanes we've been putting in. This is Prospect Park West or Hudson Street. We can do them either 2-way in certain circumstances or 1-way. But these protected bike lanes, because what they do is they reallocate the space on the roadway and effectively shorten pedestrian crossings by basically putting the parked cars out. What they do is they actually make things safer for everyone. So we'll put in a protected bike lane on an avenue, on Manhattan Avenue, and then someone will say like, that's, no one's riding it, it's not working, you should take it out. And my response to that is always that when we put these things in, all types of injury crashes drop by about 20%. Including motor vehicle and pedestrians. So even just because it's a bike lane, because we're organizing the street, because we're reducing the crossing distances, because we're making everything more predictable, we're actually giving everyone, even like if you're not riding a bike, a safety benefit. So we've been as I said, very, very busy. This is our projected total for 2017. We've had a lot of rain this year, so maybe our eyes are a little bit bigger than our stomach at this point, but we'll see. We'll see how far we can get with more protected bike lanes this year. Something else we look at is where we have an existing bike route, how to update and organize that and make it better. This is Christie Street. This is a project I worked on this past year. In this case, we already had bike lanes on both sides of the street. Problem is we had further north from where this photo was taken, we had a protected bike lane feeding into it on this side. So it's southbound on this side. So what cyclists had to do is cross to the other side of the street and go down, and then over here is an entrance to the Manhattan Bridge. So cyclists pretty much had to go down, over to a 2-way street, go down here, and then come back again. So we figured out that probably the best way to do that was to keep them on one side of the street the entire way. So in this case, we just took what we already had, took the existing width on both sides of the street, and just moved it over. This project, it's pretty much the very, very inexpensive materials, pretty much thermoplastic, paint, some bollards here, and a couple of Jersey barriers just because it's New York and sometimes bollards aren't enough. Okay, so here, why is this not showing up? There we go, okay. So here is another case where we had a street, this is Pettigat Avenue in Brooklyn. This connects to, it's a street that leads to the Jamaica Bay Greenway, which is a great, fantastic greenway that runs around Jamaica Bay, mostly in Queens, a little bit in Brooklyn. But in this case, we took advantage of a resurfacing that was happening there. So the entire street was going to be resurfaced. It was super wide. I think they were parking school buses on the street or like semi-trucks or something like that. But what we did was when the resurfacing happened, we were able to come back and pretty much just move everything over a bit. We just updated our drawing to just have a right-of-way right there. We were able to go in and make a great pedestrian and a cyclist amenity for people to connect down to that greenway. Just pretty much just taking advantage of the fact that they were going to have to go in and restripe it anyway, so why not just do this? And then this is pretty much the result, the best possible case you can have when you are able to do some sort of street improvement. This is Kent Avenue in Brooklyn. My boss, Ted, likes to put this slide in every single presentation he does. He's really proud of this. This was actually his first project many years ago. But these kids here, the story he tells is that they are pretty much only allowed to ride on the protected lane and on Kent Avenue. And that is something that in a city as congested and as hectic as New York City, that's astounding to know that parents actually trust our infrastructure enough that these kids can just ride unsupervised up and down the avenue here. Because it really it speaks to a level of comfort that people have with these design treatments that we do. So yeah, so what's the result of all this work that we've been doing? On the bicycle side, we've had immense growth in daily cycling. There's tons more people out in the street. You can see it. We've got City Bike. That's, I think there's like 60 to 70,000 trips per day on average happening with City Bike. So yeah, all the good numbers are going up. Also, this is something else we publish. It's a cycling risk analysis where we figure out pretty much, compared to the amount of trips that are being taken, how likely are you to be in some sort of like either a serious crash or a fatality. And so according to the amount of people who are out there, this is your risk level, and it's been tracking downward pretty steadily over the past 10, 15 years or so. So yes, safety numbers, but also safety with infrastructure and design improvements. You may also ask, in this case, we have Amsterdam Avenue here. We go from 4 lanes down to 3 lanes. How are we able to move the same amount of vehicles, or what is the traffic hit on putting in a protected bike lane along the corridor? Something we do whenever we do a street safety improvement like this, we will actually look at the curb regulations, the parking regulations, to figure out what is the best use. We're a big city, so a lot of our curb regulations, through no fault of our own, are outdated. So we will then, take a fresh look at that whole corridor. So in this case, Amsterdam Avenue, we were able to install loading zones for commercial activity during certain times of the day. We also have, kind of hard to see here because it's way in the back, but left turning treatments so that vehicles that are turning left can exit sort of these 3 moving lanes to have a sort of pocket space to then make a turn. So along with a protected bike lane we were able to put in, which is a great safety benefit, this is our before and after travel time analysis. Notice how these 2 lines are pretty much exactly the same. They're tracking exactly where they were before. So yeah, oftentimes we find this to be the case. When we go in and actually smarten up the street, we take all the, we put the bike lane in, we look at the curb regulations, we make the turn treatments, all that stuff. The sum total is pretty much almost always, it's pretty much functioning exactly as it was before, only now it's just more safe, and it's also a welcome place for people to walk and bike. So on the pedestrian safety side, we do a lot of things like this, simple curb extensions, where we'll have a really wide, wide crossing, or like usually when the 2 different grids intersect, and we will just using paint and a couple of bollards, we'll shorten those crossing distances. We will tighten up the turns. Sometimes we'll even just widen the existing street because pedestrians are having a tough time walking on the sidewalk. We have a lot of crowded sidewalks. But what this does, not only by creating more pedestrian space, it organizes and normalizes the roadway so that crossings or turns are more predictable and that reduces crashes. Here's an example of something we did in concrete. In this case, we had pretty much an acre of asphalt out here. We were able to put in a crossing island here, and then also organize the turn so that the cars were in the correct spot and they knew pretty much where they were supposed to go instead of just having this chaos happening up there. This is another example. This is the entrance of the Manhattan Bridge. In this case, we were able to take all this space here, extend the curb over there. There's an island on there. It's kind of hard to see. But yeah, this is an area where, just because we have a lot of large bridges that we're trying to constantly feed with cars, which is sort of the 1950s to 60s way of moving people around, we're coming back with a more modern take on that. We're trying to make something work for everyone. So in this case, we were able to not really reduce any of the vehicle lanes, just organize the space and improve the pedestrian experience for crossing at all these legs of the intersection. And the result of that, this is part of our Vision Zero efforts. That's our interagency program to reduce pedestrian and cyclist and motorist fatalities. We've been able to reduce a lot of the fatalities that are happening in the city for pedestrians and also just for everyone with all these design treatments along with other efforts by PD and other agencies. So to talk about public space a bit, we just want to go from this to that. This is like the thing that New York City is known for. We want to be known more for things like this. In that case, we have a plaza program where we will take sort of pieces of the road that aren't really used that much, but also have a lot of activity on them, so sort of extra little bits, just because of the way our grids and all the various boroughs all connect and interact. There's a lot of places where you'll have a street that may not see that many cars, but has a lot of other uses. So we'll just shut that street down. In that case, we'll have just like planters out the end to make sure the cars can't come in, but it just allows us to then open up the space for the surrounding businesses and beautify it, have a place to, where people can be social, where they can hang out. Here's an example of our urban art program. In this case, we took a normal curb extension that we would have done in like beige, boring paint, and we made it fun. So in this case, we work. Artists can submit plans where they say like, oh, you've got this space. They'll work with our engineers and our planners, and they'll come up with a color scheme that they can then put down on the street. In this case, there's also a city bike station in there. But we have numerous examples of urban art across the city. But it's really great to see these things because they just kind of pop up. They're all generally they'll last about a year, and then we'll actually just go over that with normal paint, just because refreshing this every year is kind of difficult. But it's really great to see those because you never quite know where they're going to be next. Like I have access to the plans. I should know where these things are, and I forget. It's a big town, so I'll just like come across something like this, and I'll think, oh wow, that's Wendy. That's our urban art director. She's up to something again. That's great. Also, here's an example of one of those little unused pieces of roadway I was just talking about for a plaza. This is Putnam Triangle. With this, we've got the barriers right here, so people can't drive through it. Any vehicles that are coming down here, you have to make the turn that way. In this case, I think we actually had to reroute a bus route over there, but we were able to put in a bus shelter, so it ended up working out. But these spaces, they work best when they are used, when they're well programmed. One of the things that came up during the planning stage for this particular plaza was that neighbors were worried that it was just going to attract vagrants, that people were just going to sort of camp out there and it was just going to become just a place that no one wanted to be, like a blight on the area. And something that we do to make sure that doesn't happen is we work with, we have a maintenance partner for every single one of these. We work with either local businesses or sometimes a business improvement district to manage the seating so that it's organized and stacked every night and then redeployed every morning, so that that we can have activities and other things in the space to keep it clean. And we find that this, generally people, even across the city, people just like they love hanging out in these places, and we don't really, none of the problems that people were worried about have actually materialized in the way that they were thinking. Here's an event that was going on at that exact plaza I just showed you. This is a different angle. But in this case, it's I think it was called an intergenerational dance party. So it's pretty much, parents, kids, grandparents all hanging out, books, this is the type of thing that is a typical activity in our public plazas. It's not, a homeless man sleeping. It's kids and their parents and grandparents all hanging out, having fun. Like these are the things that are possible when you just, close down a bit of street. So yeah, when everything comes together, our DOT, as I said before, rather big. We have transit people, we have bike people, we have ped people, and then sometimes we all have to work together. In this case, this is a bus island next to a two-way protected bike lane in Queens. So yeah, we're able to design things that will work with transit, that will allow people to have a protected bike lane in the same place where we also have a bus. Over here, we have the bus lanes over here on the one side of the street, the bike lane on the other. Typically, across the country, bike lanes are generally on the right side, I believe. New York likes to put them on the left. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we have buses on pretty much every street in the city. Here's an example of Queens Boulevard, where we took what was called the Boulevard of Death, and we were able to, seriously, that's what it was called, we were able to add pedestrian space to shorten the crossings at these slip lanes here to actually create a crossing where none had existed before, so that the cars are coming in more slowly, and then to add a protected bike lane here. Just a word about maintenance of this. You may be wondering how this functions when it's snowing or something like that. Generally, what we do is we maintain an 11-foot clearance. 11 feet is our magic number for street sweepers and for snowplows. So as long as they have 11 feet of clearance, they can pretty much get into any of these spaces and then do their work. Which, I mean, snow plowing doesn't happen as much as it might up here, but street sweeping, a lot of people, a lot of activity, that happens sometimes on a daily basis. So we have to adhere to that pretty closely, and pretty much everything I've shown you so far does maintain that magic number of 11 for us for the clearance for all those improvements. So everything that I've showed you can pretty much be swept, with the exception of the plaza, which is maintained. So yeah, First Avenue, pretty standard parking protected bike lane over here, 11-foot clearance there. Pedestrian island shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians. It also, for vehicles that are coming off of the side street, it forces them into a shorter crossing. We found, we did some analysis and found that actually that's where the turns are most deadly, is when you're turning off the minor street onto the major street. So these islands here do a lot to slow the vehicles down as they are turning. And then also, I mean, this is something, I know there's a bike lane here, but this is an example of summer streets. This is just something, if you want to try to activate a corridor or activate even a concept that you can do this, this is just cones. And police overtime, but it's just mostly just cones. We just put cones, we shut the streets down, and people are just out there hanging out, having a blast. We've been doing this for years now. This gets more and more popular every year. So yeah, this is something where if you want to just do a proof of concept, and hey, we've got this great park trail over there, this greenway trail over there, and we want to get it to the central business district so people can, for a nice weekend, can ride this trail, come in and spend some money at a restaurant. This is a great way to do it. Just shut a street down, put in some cones, and just let it happen. And then also, as when things come together, this is a public plaza here in Madison Square, where we also have a city bike station. There's bike infrastructure in the background. It's currently being ripped up right now, so the road is being resurfaced, so it doesn't look like this right now. But yeah, it will look like this in about a week or two once we put everything back. And yeah, so one last nice photo of Queens Boulevard. That's actually me down there on the bottom. But I guess I'll just turn it over to Stephen now. Or are there any questions? I'm not sure. I guess I'll go with a couple questions, and then we'll come out. Yep. I think they're supposed to go to the microphone.
Yeah. Just really quick, can you speak, Patrick, to some of the data collection, maybe for the sake of a smaller, mid-sized town? I mean, I know you guys talk about how data is so critical to sell the public on what you're doing. I mean, is that just brute force manpower, like GIS, or how do you guys do that? Any lessons for places not New York?
Well, yeah, our data collection, it's on a huge scale. We have a contractor who actually does all these counts, but in a pinch, I've pretty much had to do all the types of data collection that we would normally contract out, with the exception of like an ATR, which is like a traffic recorder that's like a tube on the street that just hangs out there for a week or two and gives you data. But in terms of trying to figure out how you can do these improvements, I usually just try to figure out if I'm worried about a street not being able to function if I'm going to make a change on it. Yeah, just going there during when it's busy, seeing what the street is like, maybe counting how many cars are turning, counting how many bikes are using it. That's something that I, like myself or a coworker, will do like a spot count of the time when we know it's going to be the busiest, like a 3-hour period. In terms of other types of data collection, you know, we've like, you know, for some of these projects, we'll actually just drive a car up and down to see like, oh, what was it like before we made this change? Now we took a lane out. What's it like now? We'll just like sit there with a stopwatch and we'll time it. So yeah, it can be, our data collection is very robust, but can also be very ad hoc and informal, just depending on what the level of scrutiny that we actually need to adhere to. Sometimes we have to submit plans to the federal government, and that's a whole different, you know, ball of wax. But yeah, with a lot of these things, you know, you just go out and, you know, just during the time when you know it's going to be most active or most used, and just, you know, stand there with a clicker, stand there with a clipboard, stand there with a stopwatch, and just do it. In terms of like crash reports, things like that, those are, I mean, it's just coordination with, in our case, the police department to look at those crashes. They're not actually great at filling out the reports, so you really just have to read them all anyway. So like we'll show you numbers of the types of crashes. That just represents a lot of work of just people just looking at these crash reports and trying to figure out what these officers were talking about when they have these little lines and arrows of what happened, and then trying to figure out what type of crash that was and what we can do about it. So yeah, it's a certain degree of brute force with that, just like being able to sit there and read things over and over and over again.
Hi, I've actually biked Brooklyn and Manhattan last summer, so I can speak to how well the system has come together and like the diversity of all the different tactics used, and it works really well. From the side of community advocacy, I'm curious as to what the level of public engagement, education process, and working with communities in terms of like what they want, because there can sometimes be a feeling that bike infrastructure means gentrification. Yeah, yeah. And even when it is actually serving more low-income people that don't have access to cars but do have access to bikes. There was a study done in Baton Rouge around this is actually serving communities of color and poor communities in a really effective way, but that doesn't mean that's how everyone feels all the time. So what is the level of community engagement that DOT does or that works with community groups to make the bike infrastructure work for the local community?
Okay, so as I said, New York's really big, so we have many different types of community engagement. It all depends on which neighborhood we're talking about. If we're talking about a place that's sort of in the heart of city bike land, that's like been experiencing these changes for about a decade or so, there's a different level of engagement that goes on there, because for the most part, the people in those neighborhoods, they get what we're trying to do. They've seen it happen, and they definitely want more. They are asking us for more. We're in the case sometimes of having to tell them slow down a bit because we only have so many resources. But there are a lot of other neighborhoods that in the outer boroughs mostly, or even northern Manhattan, that are this is very new to them. And in that case, it's really just a case-by-case basis. I mean, there are places where, you know, it's more of a wealthier, you know, sort of almost a suburb of New York that within the city itself. But in that case, you may have a lot of people who fear change, who fear what this is going to do to their property values, and that's one type of engagement that we'll have to do. Where we'll have to talk people through the changes. Sometimes we'll do a site visit to say, here's what we're proposing. It's not that different from what you've got there now. It's only just providing a safe space for bikes, or it's worked in other neighborhoods where people now see them as see these things as an amenity. But then there are also other neighborhoods where you're right. There's the gentrification issue that comes up. What we found is the best way to do is to go into these communities before we even have a plan. We have a bike master plan from 1997 that is essentially irrelevant at this point because it's been so many years since that plan was made. But we'll go to these communities. Actually, one in particular, I did a series of workshops with in Brownsville in central Brooklyn, where we went in with just to show them these are the things that we could do. These are the treatments we have. This is what we've done elsewhere. We have no plans of where we're going to put them in your community, or even if we are. We want to know from you where the dangerous parts are, and what are your concerns in terms of traffic safety in this neighborhood. And when we phrase things that way, when we go in and say this is we don't have an agenda, we just want to make things safer, we find that the safety argument really works with folks because they understand, oh, this is something that we are going to do ourselves. This is not something that's going to be imposed on us. This is something that we are going to help have a hand in planning. These are the spots where things are bad, or where things are dangerous, or these are the places where we want to bike, or we want to walk more safely. And then we all sort of, as a group, as the city plus the community, we're able to work on a plan that we can then work towards implementing. So it all depends on the neighborhood, but yeah, there's a healthy amount of civic engagement in New York City. It takes many forms. Yeah.
I saw your stats about accidents between pedestrians and bikes and cars.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering whether you keep any stats with accidents between pedestrians and bicyclists. This is somewhat, the context here is 30 years ago I was a bicycle messenger,
mm-hmm.
in Boston with 10 speed, no helmet. But
Mm-hmm.
I had a hard time because, people would be very focused on cars, but then they felt safe and they would walk in front of me, but bikes were not on their radar screening. So there were lots of interactions between bicyclists and pedestrians.
Yeah, the thing with that is that those interactions, those crashes, they are underreported because a lot of them are not very severe. It's more of an inconvenience than a trip to the hospital. But there is, maybe one or two reported severe crashes between peds and bikes a year, I think, in New York City. It's really more of an irritation factor we found because people, even though automobiles, cars are by far the most dangerous thing for a pedestrian on the city street, by far. Orders of magnitude bigger. It's the kind of thing that if you're crossing the street and someone bikes by, sort of brushes by you, you're going to remember that. You're not going to remember all of the other people who were riding a bike that day that you didn't even notice because they were just doing the right thing and being courteous and stopping when they should. You just remember that one interaction is going to stick in your mind. So we found that it's one of those things where people bring it up a lot because they're concerned about it. The numbers don't really play out, but we understand why it keeps on getting brought up. And we do a lot of education to try to get cyclists to be more responsible users of the roadway because we do find that it is an issue when people have a negative view on the very small percentage of people who are out there riding around not doing the right thing. So it does happen.
If there's time, I have two questions. One of them is, what do you do when people put obstructions or double park or things like that in your bike lane, thinking of it as extra space? How do you deal with that? Okay,
well, I can actually, the presentation's going. Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, what we do, well, if it's a problem, we can look at a couple of different strategies. One is, of course, enforcement, where we try to target police activity to that area. We also look at why people are double parking. Sometimes it's because there's just like a regular there's a regular cleaning reg where like cars just don't move except for once a week. So maybe we have to look at the curb regulations to allow more turnover on those particular blocks so that people aren't double parking anymore. Something else we will do is, if we have the ability to, we will redesign the street to make that bike lane parking protected. That doesn't work in every case because we have a lot of constraints of width and right-of-way and those types of things. But that's a situation where oftentimes if we have a heavily used bike lane in an area, in the Christie Street example, that was the one I was going to go to, but in that case, we have like hundreds and hundreds of cyclists per hour there. It's a bridge entrance. It's one of 3 ways to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So it's heavily used by cyclists. If we have people who are double parking for 5 minutes, constantly, that's an issue. That's a real problem. So in that case, we're able to redesign the roadway. But yeah, we can definitely make either adjustments to the curb regulations or enforcement a priority at those locations as well. Okay.
Second question is, do you have, understand you build these around what the users, you kind of dictate or what you see there. Do you have any socioeconomic criteria that you use to prevent bias toward one neighborhood versus another, or economic justice concerns?
We have, short answer is we're more focused on safety. So our DOT is more focused on making things safer. And in that case, we'll look at where crashes are happening or corridors that are dangerous. And that's really our primary goal. From the economic standpoint, our Economic Development Corporation, it's kind of like a quasi-city agency that works with to try to redevelop public land oftentimes, or public right-of-way, to make it pretty much just to the economic benefit of the city. In that case, that's where we find a lot of those bike and ped improvements happening for an economic reason, because what they want to do is activate a new space. Right now, we're redeveloping the entire east side of Manhattan to make make a greenway that sort of rivals the one on the west side. And in that case, our EDC, our Economic Development Corporation, they're viewing the bike lane there as an amenity to bring people in. That's like how we work with our greenway paths, is to try to get, like, we have an existing greenway running along a coastline. We want to get people to and from the sort of the hub of the community wherever that greenway happens to be. So we'll do a project that makes a safe connection from the greenway up to the local CBD for that neighborhood, so that we can facilitate people to and from, but also to just get out in the community and hopefully spend some money.